Today, let us talk about BNPL, Buy Now, Pay Later. How do businesses take advantage of BNPL? How does it fit into the macroeconomic purview? And finally, what it means to individuals like you and me, and how can we take advantage of this, or whether we should be using it or not. Let us begin with the companies. All companies have investors, and investors seek returns on their investment. Now, for companies to generate returns, they need to increase their profits, as profits account for returns. And in order to increase profits, companies can either increase the revenue or reduce the costs. However, costs cannot be reduced beyond a certain basic amount that the company needs to spend to sustain itself and deliver the products. So it comes to revenue. Now, to increase the revenue, the company can either increase the price of the product or the quantity of product sold. However, in a competitive market, the companies cannot increase the price beyond a certain threshold, as competitors will cut prices, or the customers, once the price increase beyond their affordability, will simply look elsewhere. So we come down to the quantity. Now, as per the fundamentals of supply and demand, at any given price point, there is always a fixed quantity demanded in the market. Now, in a growing market, this quantity keeps increasing as more and more people enter the market for the product. However, once the market starts saturating, for instance, smartphones, as today anyone and everyone who can afford a smartphone already owns a smartphone, and in a saturated market, increasing the quantity becomes a challenge, as companies either have to cut the prices beyond this point or introduce new products. However, that's a different story, but companies cannot cut prices beyond a certain threshold, as prices need to cover the costs plus certain reasonable profits. And this is where buy now pay later comes into play. This is where companies try to send a marketing message that makes people feel that the product is more affordable than it actually is. Now, what BNPL also does is it separates the pleasure of purchase from the pain of payment. So, it not only makes the product feel more affordable by breaking down the payment into smaller monthly installments and also pushing it beyond for a later point in time, it also separates the purchase from the payment. Now, this increases the addressable market, solving the challenges for growth. Now, before understanding the macroeconomic purview, let us understand how BNPL works. In a normal setting, there's a buyer and a seller. When a purchase or a transaction occurs, the buyer pays to the seller. However, in BNPL, we have a financial intermediary. This intermediary, let's say if I am acting as the intermediary, I would pay to the seller and assume the financial liability of recovering the payments from the buyer at a later point in time. Now, this creates a consumer credit cycle. What it means is that a lot of people are making purchases on credit or have made purchases that they are yet to pay up for. Now, when consumers start defaulting on these loans or liabilities, the credit bubble bursts, and this has macroeconomic consequences. Now, moving on to what it means for the economy. Now, if investors lose confidence in companies, that is when companies do not deliver growth, the investors withdraw their investments, and this creates a problem. Now, that's not the only problem. When companies are unable to sell the quantity that they have produced, inventory starts piling up. And when inventory starts piling up, companies start to cut costs. And where do they cut costs? Well, they start laying off people. And yes, of course, they pay millions of dollars to consultants to justify the layoff decisions, but that's a different story. Now, when they lay off employees, the unemployment in the market increases. Now, when there's an increase in unemployment, the consumer confidence is also hit, as people are constantly living under the fear of being laid off. Now, what happens? With this uncertainty, people curb their spendings. And what happens? Well, further inventory starts piling up. Now, this creates a negative spiral. It is important for macroeconomists, or rather economists, to have policies that avoid creating an inventory pileup, because once this negative spiral is initiated, it may lead to a recession. So, what do economists do? Well, they try to incentivize consumer spending. One example is Japan. Japan incentivized consumer spending when it was going into a recession in the 80s. Another example of something that went wrong was the $2,000 free money given to consumers during the COVID lockdown. Now, that's a different story. What happened was they wanted to retain consumer confidence and stop people from curbing their spendings, but rather, people spent more on discretionary items and it led to an inflation. However, that's something from the Keynesian school of economics or the Keynesian school of thought when it comes to macroeconomics. So, from a macroeconomic standpoint, if BNPL boosts consumer confidence and in turn the consumer spending, well, it's good for the economy. But the concern is that the consumer should be paying for the products at a later point in time. If there's a credit default bubble that bursts, for instance, when too many people buy products that they cannot afford and delay the point of payment at a later point in the future, but they start to default when it comes to pay for the product, it bursts the credit bubble that was financing the consumer confidence. Now, that's the negative aspect from a macroeconomic standpoint. Now, let us understand what does it mean for you and me as consumers and whether we should be using it. Now, as a good MBA, my answer is it depends, and as a good consultant, I would say let us dive in deeper into this. First, consumption today is more valuable than consumption tomorrow because the purchasing power of money decreases due to inflation. Hence, consumers want to make their purchases today and postpone the problem of saving money for tomorrow. Second, we have already been using it for high value purchases such as cars and houses. Then why not use it for smartphones and holidays? For this, we need to understand the difference between a capital expenditure and an operational expense. A capital expenditure is for an asset that is going to accrue benefits over a longer time frame. For instance, a laptop which may last for 3 to 5 years, a car for 5 to 7 years, or a house which may last for 10 years or more. In this case, you are going to accrue benefits over a longer time horizon. So, if you are postponing your payment for a future point, let's say a year later or 2 years later, and still finishing it within the time frame within which you are accruing benefits, it's absolutely fine. However, for operational expenses for which the benefits are either instantaneous or within a very short time frame, such as an expensive meal or a week holiday, then that is not fair because effectively you're mortgaging your future earnings for benefits that have already been reaped in the past. With this being said, the answer lies on the nature of purchase and the timeline of your benefits. However, having said this, we need to understand that this does not apply to discretionary and frivolous purchases. For instance, shopping. I understand that designer handbag and those expensive sneakers are going to last for a few years. However, we need to acknowledge that the benefit that you're deriving here is psychological and that boost of endorphins is going to fade away or dissipate in a matter of weeks. Hence, you should not use this underlying logic of deriving benefits over a prolonged period to utilize BNPL. In other words, what I am trying to say is you must not use this logic as a self-serving bias to justify irrational purchase decisions. The point that I'm trying to drive home is that if the benefits are being accrued over a longer time horizon, timing your financial payouts may be sensible. However, if your benefits are instantaneous or within a very short frame of time, postponing your financial obligation may not be sensible. With this being said, if you found this video helpful or interesting, please feel free to leave a like or subscribe to the channel. And of course, if you want to agree to disagree, please feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments below.